The announcement came at precisely 9:12 in the morning, a time usually reserved for system briefings and protocol reviews. Instead of discussing encryption updates, the room was filled with stiff expressions and forced smiles. The head of human resources stood beside the CEO's son, both avoiding eye contact, as if the simplest glance might reveal the truth they were hiding. The words were short and clinical, stating that her presence no longer aligned with the company's direction. No incident was mentioned. No misconduct was cited. The message was designed to end discussion before it began. Her colleagues remained frozen in disbelief. She had been their shield against digital predators, the rare kind of engineer who anticipated threats before they materialized. The company owed 2 major recoveries to her vigilance. Yet not one executive offered gratitude. They only watched as her security badge deactivated and her workstation screen faded to black. It became clear that competence was not the issue. Someone wanted her absence more than they valued her contributions. She stepped into the corridor with calm precision, moving as if the humiliation meant nothing. Outside the glass doors, she paused to glance at her smartwatch. Its display pulsed softly, as though it carried secrets no one else could read. Then she smiled. It was not the smile of defeat, but the quiet expression of someone who knew a story was unfinished. None of them noticed that her smartwatch had been linked to boardroom logs for months. Every conversation, every careless remark, every unauthorized instruction had been stored without fanfare. They believed they had removed a threat. What they had actually done was create an adversary who no longer owed them loyalty. Her exit was not an ending. It was the beginning of something far more calculated. The CEO's son entered the company with the confidence of someone who believed talent could be inherited. His appointment as Director of Innovation was announced with great pomp, though many employees whispered that his resume was thinner than a login password. 3 internal assessments had been prepared to evaluate his competence, and he failed each one spectacularly. He struggled to understand the terminology, confused architecture diagrams with decorative charts, and treated cyber threats as fictional problems exaggerated by anxious technicians. The board ignored these red flags, convinced that bloodline was enough to justify authority. Once seated in his new office, he began approving expensive digital initiatives that he barely skimmed. He claimed that the company needed bold investments, yet his signatures appeared on documents he could not decipher. He dismissed encryption as a hobby for introverts and proudly announced that true leaders did not waste time on what he called complicated puzzles. His meetings became long monologues about innovation, though no one could recall a single idea that originated from him. His ignorance would have remained embarrassing rather than dangerous if not for his appetite to impress potential investors. He regularly accessed sensitive files without clearance, bypassing layers of protection built to prevent exactly such behavior. He wanted to showcase technological mastery, unaware of the risks he triggered each time he clicked beyond his privileges. He bragged about shortcuts, believing that cheating security protocols proved leadership. What he never suspected was that the smartwatch he casually ridiculed had been silently capturing every action. It monitored unauthorized entries, recorded timestamps, and stored his voice as he boasted about feats he did not understand. His arrogance was more than a personality flaw. It created a trail of violations that no lawyer could erase and no executive could ignore once revealed. 2 weeks after her departure, the building no longer felt invincible. A message from the investors arrived without warning. They requested a complete compliance audit, not a routine verification, but a forensic investigation into every digital decision made in the last quarter. The tone of the request was cold and meticulous. It hinted at suspicions, not curiosity. The board members shifted in their seats as they read it. They understood that an audit was not a visit. It was a scalpel. The CEO's son reacted first. He paced across his office, opening drawers and scrolling through files he barely recognized. He remembered approving a strategic partnership that promised international expansion. He did not remember reading the fine print, especially the part that referenced foreign data routing. The investors knew about it. They knew it violated regulations that could bankrupt the enterprise. Panic settled where arrogance once lived. He called meetings that produced no answers and demanded explanations from team leaders who had never been consulted in the first place. The board attempted damage control. They sent carefully worded messages to the former encryption engineer, addressing her with unexpected warmth. They spoke of shared history, mutual respect, and opportunities for collaboration. Their tone suggested reconciliation. Their intention was survival. Her inbox collected every plea, yet she offered no acknowledgement. While they scrambled for salvation, she prepared something else entirely. Her smartwatch did not merely store files. It held conversations, timestamps, and irrefutable evidence of negligence. The audit was scheduled. The investors would arrive in person. The hierarchy that once rested on family power creaked under the weight of secrets it was never designed to carry. The documents were ready. The system was fragile, and one truth remained. She was the only person who could save the company, and she no longer belonged to it. The legal team gathered in a private conference room, expecting a routine clarification. They believed she would hand over missing documentation, accept a polite apology, and perhaps agree to assist during the audit. The atmosphere carried an artificial calm, the kind that masks desperation. Files were stacked neatly, screens flickered with encrypted logs, and every executive in the room hoped the problem could be resolved with a signature and a forced smile. She entered without emotion, placed her smartwatch on the polished table, and waited. No speeches were necessary. While they indulged in introductions and nervous flattery, she observed each of them as though measuring their awareness of the collapse they were about to witness. When the lawyers requested access to her data, she simply tapped the screen of her watch. The projection that appeared was not a collection of notes. It was a ledger of truth. Timestamps glowed like fresh wounds. Signatures appeared beside unauthorized approvals the CEO's son had issued. A sequence of digital transfers revealed funds rerouted through channels that violated internal policy. Then came the voice recordings. His laughter echoed in the room as he bragged about overriding her encryption barriers. Each sentence became another nail hammered into the illusion of competence the board had protected. No one moved. There were no objections. No frantic attempts to reinterpret the evidence. The silence grew dense, settling like a verdict that could not be appealed. Executives who once viewed her as expendable now saw the consequences of their decision. By removing her, they had removed the only shield standing between them and disaster. She reclaimed her smartwatch, walked toward the door, and left them staring at the ruins of their reputation. They believed they had dismissed an engineer. In truth, they had released the one person capable of rewriting their future without raising her voice. The audit's preliminary findings hit the company like a seismic wave. The projected fines were not symbolic penalties. They were numbers capable of erasing an entire legacy. Investors who once toasted the company's global potential now threatened to withdraw every cent unless the situation was neutralized immediately. The boardroom, once a theater of confidence, became a chamber of anxiety. Every executive present understood one truth. Their survival depended not on the CEO's name, but on the one person they had expelled without hesitation. They invited her back, though this time with humility rather than authority. Gone were the clipped tones and manufactured smiles. The board did not offer apologies. They offered options. They spoke of restoring her position, issuing a bonus, even granting her a leadership role. She listened without interruption. She did not react. The gesture was merely an attempt to erase their mistake. What she needed was not validation. It was control. She placed a document on the table and watched their expressions shift as they read. The terms were simple and devastating. She would not return as an employee. She would become an owner. Her compensation would not be measured in salary. It would be measured in equity. She demanded voting rights strong enough to override the decisions of those who once dismissed her. She required personal indemnity, ensuring that no fallout from their negligence could ever touch her. Finally, she requested a seat at the board, positioned exactly where the CEO's son had once mocked her ambitions. The board hesitated, then glanced at the numbers projected on the screen. Refusal meant collapse. Acceptance meant her assent. Pens moved. Contracts transformed futures. They believed they were saving their company. In truth, they were handing her the keys to it. She had not orchestrated revenge. She had engineered succession. The CEO's son refused to accept what had happened. In his mind, his downfall was an accident, a misunderstanding that would eventually correct itself. He believed reputation was elastic and could snap back into place with enough excuses. He claimed the engineer had sabotaged him, insisting she had manipulated the system to make him look incompetent. He rambled about stress and workload, hoping others would sympathize with the burden of leadership. Every explanation he offered was an attempt to avoid the one truth staring back at him. His failure was not engineered. It was earned. The legal team did not entertain theatrics. They presented logs extracted directly from her smartwatch. She had not accessed the system after her termination. The son, however, had repeatedly breached encryption layers without clearance. Each digital movement was traced back to his personal credentials. The recordings captured his voice as he bragged to an investor about overriding protections he barely understood, presenting recklessness as innovation. The investor, he tried to impress forwarded concerns to the board, which turned curiosity into catastrophe. When the evidence was laid out, denial collapsed. The CEO's son watched as every poorly chosen decision formed a chain around his future. Security escorted him to his office. The room that once represented privilege now felt like a storage unit of broken illusions. He removed framed certificates he never read, collected branded pens he never used, and stared at a desk where no real work had ever been done. The badge that granted him access to a world he never earned was deactivated before he reached the exit. There was no press release, no farewell gathering. His name faded from internal documents as though it had never existed. Employees spoke of him cautiously, not with anger, but with a quiet warning. He became the unspoken example of what happens when ego tries to masquerade as competence. And while he disappeared into silence, the empire he once inherited continued without him, guided by someone who had mastered what he only pretended to understand. The morning she returned, the company lobby felt different. It was the same marble floor, the same oversized screens flashing market updates, yet an unfamiliar tension vibrated through the air. Employees paused mid-conversation as the glass doors opened. She crossed the threshold at a steady pace, not wearing a badge, not escorted by security, but followed by the authority of sealed contracts and ownership rights. This was not a comeback. It was an arrival. Executives stood as she stepped into the boardroom. There were no speeches to welcome her. Words seemed too fragile for the reality unfolding before them. They knew her presence carried the weight of every decision they failed to make. The same leaders who once questioned her relevance now struggled to hold her gaze. Confidence drained from faces that once dismissed her expertise. Chairs shifted subtly, revealing discomfort masked as respect. Down in the IT department, reactions were different. The engineers who watched her walk out weeks earlier remembered her accuracy, her foresight, the way she solved problems others refused to acknowledge. Eyes widened as they recognized that the person they once underestimated now controlled the fate of the systems they maintained. She did not greet them with bitterness. She acknowledged their silent loyalty with a nod that meant more than any speech. The CEO remained in his office, unwilling to face the very person he once allowed his son to mock. His door stayed closed, but his surrender echoed through the corridors. The hierarchy had inverted. Titles no longer protected incompetence. Influence no longer flowed from family ties. The culture shifted from empty slogans to measurable results. She took her seat at the head of the boardroom table, not to reclaim a position, but to redefine the institution. The company had not hired her back. It had become hers. Competence, once ignored, stood unchallenged at the center of power. Her rise did not require applause or public justification. The world outside the company discovered her brilliance without a single introduction slide or practiced pitch. She traveled through airports with a calm few understood, entering negotiation rooms where firms expected a conventional leader armed with documents and rehearsed statements. She simply placed her smartwatch on the table, let the silence settle, and observed how confidence shifted. The executives across from her sensed something rare, something unteachable. They saw clarity without aggression, certainty without theatrics. Deals that usually dragged on for months concluded in days. The same device once ridiculed as a quirky accessory became her silent companion. Whenever doubts surfaced, she tapped the screen, not to reveal secrets, but to remind decision makers that precision had replaced ego. Partners found comfort in her logic. They trusted her because she never embellished success or used intimidation. She did not promise miracles. She offered systems that worked, and that was enough. Meanwhile, the company that dismissed her transformed into a monument of contradiction. They now called her leadership visionary, though they once ignored her warnings. They treated her signature as an essential component of every major transaction. Shareholders who once supported the CEO's son watched their fortunes stabilize under policies she designed. Meetings paused when she entered, not out of protocol, but out of awareness that profit and survival depended on her judgment. She never sought revenge. She pursued mastery. Her victory was not fueled by anger, but by the quiet conviction that truth eventually finds its audience. They believed they had removed a problem when they terminated her. What they did was unleash their solution. In an industry ruled by noise, she ascended through silence. Somewhere, far from the empire she rebuilt, the former heir to the throne likely still wonders how a single word he disrespected became the force that erased his future. The word was encryption.